Okay, this might be a bit of a lengthy video, but the question about attributes and attribute structure and how they're used and really what they are comes up very frequently with my Archicad training. So I thought I would put together a little diagram. I'll try to make this downloadable available for anybody that really wants to digest this. Here's a little schematic of the concept of how attributes work in Archicad. And I want to take some time today to review these kind of one at a time and show how they work. So first of all, these are the attributes. I'm realizing I'm cropping off my drop-down menu here, but if we go up to Options and Attribute Manager, we're going to see all of these attributes listed here, right? We have layers, we have pens, we have line types, fill types, surfaces, building materials, composites, complex profiles, and then zones. There are also MEP systems, there are operation profiles. We're not going to get into those in this session. So let's start by sort of digesting what's here. I'll leave this up for everybody to kind of look at. But layers, those are an attribute. They're an attribute and a view setting. The layer combinations, the combination of what is and what isn't visible in Archicad, is a view setting. However, the layers are applied to virtually all elements in Archicad, whether we're talking modeling elements like walls and slabs, markers, text, labels, everything is placed on a layer. That means that that layer is applied to that element and thus is an attribute. Pens, similarly, are a view setting. The pen combination is a combination of pens at different pen weights, thicknesses, and colors. But they are also an attribute because they're applied to the elements. Here we can see that the pens are not only applied to the elements, but they're also applied to other attributes. So pens are applied to the surfaces. We'll take a look at how that works here as we start to pick this apart. They're applied to building materials, they're applied to composites, and they're applied to complex profiles. Let me clean up my graphic here. Okay, there we go. So pens as an attribute are applied to elements as well as to other attributes. And that's really what this diagram is attempting to illustrate, is how these attributes are all intertwined. They really are related to each other very heavily. Now in this column right here, we have the primary modeling attributes, modeling drafting attributes, the lines, the fills, the surfaces, the building materials, and the composites. And these start to build on each other. Now the fills, we'll look over here, are applied to elements, other attributes as well, but I've skipped those over here because the line types in particular, we'll start with those, the most simple tool in Archicad, are applied at the attribute level to composites and complex profiles. There are no default line types for fills, surfaces, or building materials. Oh, sorry, my zoom is going crazy here. At the tool level, they're used with virtually all tools in Archicad. So as a direct attribute, you can pick any tool over here. Let's just grab the roof tool, for example. If I look at some of the roof settings here, I can see that there's an uncut pen, depending on the display. If I say projected with overhead, I get an overhead line type, right? So here I could see the pen and the line type are directly applied to that roof element. And that's the case with virtually any tool. If I look at the slab tool, for example, I can see here that there are pen settings and line type settings all over the place in these tools, right? So the pens and the lines are applied to virtually all tools in Archicad. The lines are applied to other attributes, namely the composites and the complex profiles. Now the fill tool is sort of the next tool in the toolkit here. The fill attribute rather. It is applied to all tools directly. If I look at, let's take a look at the wall tool, for example. I can have a basic fill here. I can say that I want to override cut fills and cut attributes. It can also be applied to a cover fill in a slab or a roof. They can be applied to the cut appearance and uncut appearance of doors and windows. Fill tools are used virtually with all, or fill attributes are used with virtually all tools. They are also used as a sub-attribute for surfaces and for building materials. That's namely the cut and uncut appearance of model elements in Archicad. Here we have a little schematic, and we'll dig into this a little bit as well. of the various fill types. So we have drafting fills, we have cover fills, and we have cut fills. Now the cover fills and the cut fills, depending on what the fill is categorized as, determine whether it's going to be available as a surface fill or a building material. Cut fills are building materials, cover fills are surfaces. So that's the fill tool in a nutshell. The surfaces. The surfaces are actually a sub-attribute of building materials. There is a default, so I suppose we should have another little leg of our diagram here showing that building materials and surfaces are interrelated as well. So let's just go ahead and add that in here. Surfaces are a sub-attribute of building materials. The default uncut appearance of any given building material has a surface. They're used with all tools. Virtually all tools in Archicad have these surface overrides. I'm a big fan of them. If you're not, then you're using the default uncut appearance of the building material to determine what the uncut appearance of that element is. But the surface is available on almost any modeling tool. So all 3D tools in Archicad have surface options. A lot of the tools like doors and windows are going to have extensive surfaces. So if we look at the door tool, for example, model attributes here, we're going to see that we have trim surfaces, we have frame surfaces, leaf surfaces, etc. So some of these sort of more GDL heavy object tools, window tools, door tools, skylight tools are going to have a lot of surfaces. The mesh tool, for example, has a top surface, a side surface, and a bottom surface for the surface override. If these are unchecked, it's going to use the default building material for all surfaces of that element. Again, looking back here, kind of reiterating, we have pen settings, we have cover fill settings, we have line type settings. So all of these attributes are used in all of these tools. The building material is the cut appearance. So the building material gets used with all 3D tools except the doors, windows, and skylights. Doors, windows, and skylights use GDL script, which technically can utilize a building material. But if we look at the fill elements here, for example, we'll find it here. We'll figure out where that's at. There are settings in here for what the fill type of this door looks like. So floor plan and section. Here we go, symbol fill. So this is not giving us building material options. These are just the fill types. We'll get into the fill settings, but building materials are not used for doors, windows, and skylights. They are, excuse me, used with the fill tool. So if we look at the fill tool directly, we have drafting fills. So that's just using just the fills that are in the fill attributes, but we can also limit our list of available fills to just what's been saved as a building material. So building materials can be used with the fill tool. Building materials are used as a sub-attribute of both composites and profiles. Those shapes, those extrusions are direct extrusions of selected building materials. The composites are not a sub-attribute of anything. They are a collective attribute. So as we saw or mentioned, the line types are a sub-attribute of building materials. Composites. The building materials are a sub-attribute of composites. So the composites collect line types and fills through building materials into a single attribute. The building materials are used for walls, slabs, roofs, and shells. Complex profiles are also a collector attribute. They use pen types, they use line types, and they use building materials, all to define what that profile looks like. The complex profiles are extrusions that get applied to walls, beams, columns, railings, and stairs. We see here that that's actually the object tool logo. I've yet to actually find an object tool that uses complex profiles. Basically, that's just alluding to the fact that you can essentially use GDL to script out complex profiles into your object. I don't know of any object that does. I see the stair logo, or sorry, the chair logo, but understand that that is the stair tool. Anything in the stair tool settings that might talk about complex profiles. So if we were to, for example, say that we have a beam stair, the profile in here, right? We see that little I-beam profile. That's the custom profile that gets applied to that stair. So any custom profile that is set to be used with what's showing as the object tool is going to be available in the stair settings. So those are essentially the attributes and how they're built out. The zone tool, zone categories are also an attribute, but those are exclusive to the zone tool. We can take a quick peek at that here. And you can just see there's really no default setting. There's no sub attributes to this. The zone categories only get applied to the zone tool. There's, even the color is not a fill in a pen. It's literally just an arbitrary RGB code or whatever, grayscale code, CMYK code. So it's not even using your pen settings to define the category color. It's just a collector for this scripted zone stamp type. Okay, so the zone stamp, zone categories kind of live in their own little world there. Let's go through these one at a time now. So we'll go ahead and start with the pens and colors. You can see here, I'm just using the out-of-the-box template here. We've got two different pen sets. There's layout pens and Archicad view pens. The difference is that this first row here becomes mostly blacks and grays in one pen set. So you could theoretically have a pen set, that view setting, with different pen weights and different pen colors depending on the function of that pen set. I'm not going to get too much into the pens because I really want to get into the meat of what these attributes are and how we manage and build them. All right, so all of these are under the option drop-down menu. If we look at the line types here, for example, what we see here is, let's just look at this as the master list, that we have several different line types. This column right here shows type. Most of these are symbol lines. There are also solid lines and dashed lines if we look by type here. So there's several dashed lines, there's a solid line. What you can do to create a new line type is you can duplicate one that's already in here. I can select a dash line and say new, and we can say this is 5x5 dash, and we could say okay. And we could say that it's got this length, and maybe it's here, and 2, and 1.5. So you can create different dashes and gaps here for that line type, right? So creating a dash line can have up to 6 dashes and 6 gaps of different lengths. So that's one line type. Another line type are these symbol line types. So the sketch line type, the bubble line type. These were all drafted in and copy and pasted in. So an example, let's go ahead and grab our line tool here. If you have a specific line pattern that you need to create, you do have to use lines and arcs. You cannot use polylines. I'm just going to go ahead and scribble something in here, right? And you can also use arcs. Whatever combination of lines you want to repeat, you then copy those. Command C, Control C. We go back up to our line types here. We can say new, and we have to say that this is a symbol, and scribble line, and then we paste that in here, right? We don't have additional dashes and gaps, it's just this pattern. So if we say that that's 0, it's going to repeat that pattern. Now if we look at that here in our line types, right, we get that line type that shows up like that. Okay, so that's a that is a symbol line type. These line types can be, if we look at the line tool here, can be a drafting line, a cut line, or a skin separator line. The cut and skin separator lines are really derivative of the lines. Again, these lines get applied to composites and complex profiles. Those are sort of the exploded or converted complex profiles and composites and extrusions that get turned into those different line types. By default, you're going to want to be using the drafting lines. Now the fill tool, if we look at the fill tool settings here, again, remember that this gets applied to all elements, but there are 3 different fill types. So here we have the use with, right? So there's the drafting fill, that gets used with the fill tool. There's the cover fill, that gets used with the surfaces, and the cut fill, that gets used with the building materials. So this is where if you're setting up new attributes and you have a new surface, for example, you want to create a fill pattern for that surface, You create that and you have to define it here as a cover fill. Let's just as a hypothetical, let me pull up a new window here, and let's just say, I'm just going to pick a stone surface at random. Eldorado is, I don't know if it's a good product or not, but I like their website because they give you really decent, if you hunt around, really decent images to leverage. So ideally, I would want that stone surface to be a repeating pattern, but just for the sake of getting this done here, let's go ahead and we'll call this Eldorado Stone 1. We'll drag and drop that into here. So there's our image, right? We're going to use that. We're going to use the same method we had before where, let's go ahead and zoom in here. Bear with me for a couple minutes while I draft this out. Right, I should have had this prepped, but it should only take a couple of seconds. We don't actually need to watch me draft the whole thing out. The idea is we want our surface and our cover fill of that surface to match. So the total height and width here need to be identical. And I would usually use a lot more time, right, making sure that this pattern tiles out properly and everything. But for right now, this will get the idea across. So we'll just say it's something like this, right? So if I take this line work here and I copy this, and then I go up to my options and fills, just like with the line types, I'm going to come in here and say new. Call it Eldorado Stone 1. And we have options. It can be a solid fill, it can be a symbol fill, it can be an image fill, or I can duplicate an existing. In this case, I want to make it a symbol fill. Again, that gives me the ability to paste this in. So we'll go ahead and say okay here. And I'm going to paste that pattern into here. If we subtract out, oh, you know what I did? I made a mistake. I set these as polylines instead of lines and arcs. But we can fix that. We go to edit, reshape. Line work consolidation has this cool option to explode lines and arcs into polylines into lines and arcs. So we'll go ahead and cycle through this, consolidate, and we'll copy this. So now this is lines, not polylines. Let's go back into our fill editor here. Oh, apparently I hit cancel, that's okay. Let's see, Eldorado Stone 1, it is a symbol fill, and we'll paste that in here. Okay, there we go. Now if I carefully drafted that out as a repeating pattern, we would see that tiling properly. The scale here is going to match whatever the scale was. There's also the stroke or the kerning of that fill. There's the little thumbnail here. This is where it shows you the preview right here of what that would look like. If you're really anal about your Archicad management, you can certainly come back in here and give it a pattern that looks more reasonable, whatever it needs to be, right? So that's just that little thumbnail there. We'll go ahead and say okay there. So, oh, one more thing here. If you recall, I mentioned that if we want to use this on the surface, it has to be set to a cover fill. If we're never going to see this cut through, we don't need to see it as a cut fill, all right? So we'll go ahead and say okay there. Now on my fill tool, I'm not going to see Eldorado Stone here, right? Because that's my building material list. If I look at my cut fills, I'm not going to see it here. If I look at my cover fills, right, now it shows up here in the fill tool or as a drafting fill, right? Because I set that fill to be used as Eldorado Stone, or the drafting fill. The Eldorado fill is a drafting fill and a cover fill, okay? So that's creating a custom drafted fill. If we look at the next stage of this, right, the fills do get used as a sub-attribute of the surfaces. So let's go ahead and go up to our surfaces here. We're going to come in here and create a new surface. So we'll say new. We can duplicate, that's fine. We'll call it Masonry Eldorado Stone 1. Okay. Now, here's the cover fill foreground pattern, right? So because I defined it as a surface fill, it's available here as the surface fill. If you recall, the pens are a sub-attribute of the surfaces as well, and this is where that gets applied. We can say that we want to use the uncut line pen of the elements that this is applied to. Generally, I don't like to do that because typically, like if we're thinking about like a wall or something, the uncut line of that wall maybe is whatever, 0.2 millimeters, 0.15 millimeters. The surface fill generally is quite a bit lighter. So we'll say that's 0.09, or I might even create a pen set where there's a 0.05 or a 0.02 pen weight, but we'll say it's a medium gray 0.09 millimeter pen. Now we do have that Eldorado stone surface image here, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and upload that. I just click this little option here and say add. There's that Eldorado stone. It has to be a JPEG or a PNG. And generally I recommend making sure that the image size, or the size of the file, is less than, it should be less than 10 megs. There's no reason for it really to be over 4 or 5 megs. We just don't need that kind of resolution out of Archicad. So here, because it's just a quick screen grab and I didn't do any touch-up work, it's a really tiny image. We'll just go ahead and say okay there, and okay. We can link the original proportions, 4 feet by 2 foot 2. We'll go ahead and double check that. It's hard to believe that that's exactly 4 feet. Nope, it's 8 foot 4. So because this was drawn out at that 8 foot 4 proportion, we want to make sure that our surfaces and our fills match. So we'll go ahead and make this 8 foot 4, and let's give it a 0 rotation so it's not flipping it upside down, and we'll go ahead and say okay here. So now, because we've created that custom surface and matched the fill to it, let's just use a slab as an example, right? We wouldn't typically see this in a slab, but we'll go ahead and apply this to this slab here. Eldorado stone, okay. We'll go ahead and show this in 3D. There's that stone on that slab. If we look at the cover fill of that slab, that gets applied here. We'll go ahead and say okay here, and we can use the fill from the surface, right? So that's gonna automatically apply that. We can then set the pens of that cover fill, right? We were using this in the surface settings. So slabs and roofs, when we apply a cover fill, are a little bit different than walls and things, but we do get that pattern, and that pattern, if we look here, is going to match that pattern. Oh, looks like over here. Anyway, if we look at this in terms of maybe there's a wall or something that this is probably more likely to get applied to, we'll drop a wall in here, and we'll apply surface overrides, and we'll put the Eldorado stone on that wall. Now if we dump in an elevation of that wall, we're going to see that wall with that same stone pattern applied to it. Obviously, we would want to be careful that our JPEG was scaled properly, that we traced it out, that it was all repeating, that we didn't get these sort of weird, irregular repeating patterns of it. But conceptually, that's how that works. The surface of the fills get applied to the surfaces get applied to the elements, the modeling elements. Now, building materials are sort of a next level collector of attributes. If we go up to options and building materials, this is what it looks like when things are cut through, right? So, right, we didn't have that Eldorado stone as a cut fill, so I can't apply that to the cut appearance of these things. But the building materials are simply collecting a cut fill type with a foreground and a background pen. So it's not going to use the default pen from the surfaces on the cut fill because this is a different fill type. It's viewed as if it's cut through, right? This wall is white because, let's go ahead and select that here. Let's go to options and building materials, and it's going to highlight which building materials are being used there, right? So generic interior, generic exterior, neither one has a fill applied to it. If I said that generic exterior has a 25% fill and it's green, oh, there we go. So now I see that wall has that green fill applied to it because I changed the building material. The cut appearance of that wall now shows green at that skin layer. So those are the building materials. If we, let's go back in here. A couple more things about the building materials worth noting. If we look here, there is a default surface. So the building materials are not just collecting the fill type, they're also setting a default surface type. So I could say that a generic exterior needs to show green, right? And then all of my walls that are not overridden, so this wall right here has that override, but if I undo that override, it's going to show green for the uncut appearance of that wall because the default surface for that exterior generic building material is green. For the interior, it's gray. So you can control the default settings, and that gives you more global control. I know a lot of firms that want to have a one-to-one relationship between their surfaces and their building materials. It's a perfectly acceptable way to manage a model. It does get complex because of this last setting of the building materials, which is the intersection priority. Now the intersection priority is if we draw two walls through each other, what says that this building material is going to bisect this building material, right? So we can see that this skin right here is running through that skin on both directions. The reason for that is, if we look at the building material settings here, that the generic exterior building material priority is 505 and the interior is 500. If I were to bump this to 506 so that it has a higher building material priority, then we see that that core runs through. So that is sort of the last setting of the building materials. There's a whole range of other information that can be applied to these building materials. Right, we can add properties and classifications to these building materials, so we can really get into the IFC, the information side, of the BIM at the building material level. We're really starting to describe what these materials are, down to their physical properties and thermal properties and everything related to those attributes. Now the next attribute is the composite. Over here, just to reiterate, the composites are applied to walls, slabs, roofs, and shells. If we look at the wall tool, for example, we can see right here that we have a basic extrusion, that's just a building material. We have a complex profile, and a composite and a complex profile are the three shape options, the extrusion options of that composite. If we look at the composite settings, right, the composite settings here, if I grab that generic wall 7-inch, for example, I can see that I have different layers. Here I have that use with walls, slabs, roofs, and shells. So depending on what shape this extrusion needs to make, I'll use those tools. The sub-attributes of this composite are its building materials. So it's a whole list of building materials, right? I can add as many building materials as I need in here. I can say that this is foam insulation. Maybe I've got concrete on this. Maybe I've got an airspace in here. Maybe I've got another layer of concrete. Maybe I've got, let's go, yeah, sure, metal framing. And last one, let's just dump in gypboard for a finish. Okay, there we go. We got a whole list of building materials here. That extrusion can be any number of building materials. I don't know that there's a limit to how many you can have. We have the pen types. So that's the line pen, the end pen. You can see hopefully here, we see the butt end of that. That can also be turned off. The line pen rather can be turned off, or the butt end line can be turned off, so you can have a totally open-ended. Something like that we might want is to not show the end line at the airspace, for example. Let's just say that airspace is 5 inches. The concrete is 8 inches on each side of that. It's just hypothetical. It's nothing that I would ever design. Let's say we've got some flat stud here. We've got 5/8, not 5-inch, 5/8 gypboard. So we can set the different skin thicknesses of all of these composite elements. We then have the ability to set the type. This ties to another view setting, the partial structure display. So this would be finish. This would be other. Concrete would be core. The airspace has to be core because you can't have, if I change this to other, for example, this is going to change. So if I want this to be core, that has to be core as well. This is going to be other, and finish. So we've got that building, or that composite built up with its building materials. all shown at whatever thickness they need to be. So the apply width, all the building materials are predefined. Their intersection properties are predefined in the building material settings. And then their pen types. This is really sort of what it actually looks like, what pen weights are going to be applied. There's also line types as another sub-attribute of the composites. So if I want the line between my foam board and my exterior to be dashed, I can do that here. If I want my line type between my framing and insulation to be a fire rated line type, I can add that here. Now when we say OK, let's go ahead and dump in that line type there, right? So, or composite type. So you can see here how these two walls relate to each other. That's based on their building materials. Again, the more complex your building material list is, the more it is to manage and juggle how these things interact with each other. I did mention the core, other, and finish. Down here at the bottom, there's the partial structure display. It's getting cropped off, but it usually says entire model. If I say without finishes, it'll turn off the finish layer. If I say core only, we'll only show the elements that are defined as core. So that can be useful for coordinating with a structural engineer who maybe only wants to see wall framing in concrete. Okay, that's composites. If we look at the other tools that can be used with, let's look at the roof, right? There's a composite option versus a building material option for the roof. The shell, same thing. We have basic extrusion of a building material or extrusion of a composite. We got slabs and walls are the other two. So if we look at the slabs, basic extrusion or building material composite, rather building material extrusion or a composite extrusion. All right, so the last tool, or rather last attribute that we're going to look at here is the complex profiles. So those profiles are used with the beams, columns, walls, railings, stairs, and curtain walls. You do have to define what that complex profile gets applied to in their settings. I mentioned the stair tool option is the object tool. I believe that's also the category for defining it to be used with the curtain wall as well. Let's take a look at the complex profile manager here, options and profile manager. The profile manager, unlike the composites that only have parallel extrusions, although I suppose the walls can be splayed or have an angle to them. But the complex profile is pretty unlimited. I know people that do entire foundation extrusions with the complex profile. You can use it for complex and detailed trim work and things like that. So if we look at this, we have options here under the edit menu. It actually pulls up a little drafting aid. We can see that this is a fill type, right? They have to be fill extrusions. And it's just the building material list is the only thing we have access to here. So it's limited to just building material extrusions in the composite editor. The building materials, similar to the composites, can be core, finish, or other in their extrusions. If we were to click on this fill and maybe edit this edge, I can see that there is surfaces are a sub-attribute as an override to the extrusions. There is a line type sub-attribute, and there is a pen type sub-attribute that can be applied to this. So we have building materials, we have pens, we have lines, and we have surfaces all applied to this complex profile. And quite literally, whatever you can draft out becomes that profile extrusion. There's no limit to how many different building materials you can include in here. Whatever you need to draft out can be extruded. And then we're defining what it's being used with here as a wall, a beam, a column, a railing, or basically other, which is primarily stair parts and curtain walls. So that is sort of the overview of attributes in a nutshell. I hope this was somewhat clear and not overly confusing, or not any more confusing than they are just sort of on their own. And I hope this helps some of you understand these attributes just a little bit better.